Is Valorant ranked more difficult in EU than NA? This is an incredibly hard question to answer because how do you measure difficulty? Each region has a different playstyle, rank distribution, quality of teamwork, etc. And even so, over 80% of Europeans seem to think that EU ranked is harder than NA. So I decided to compare the two regions using real data, personal experience, and input from high-level players to finally answer the question, is EU really harder than NA? But first, today's video is sponsored by Hone. It's the best software at optimizing your PC for gaming, and it's super easy to use. Just look at all these settings you can change. Increase your FPS, reduce input lag, and so much more. If you don't know what settings to put on, you can use the Valorant Performance preset, or a different preset for whatever game you want to play. And if you don't like any of the optimizations or want to reverse them, Hone makes it super easy to undo everything. I decided to test it by running Valorant before and after the optimizations, and Hone brought my average FPS up by about 200. Hone has a ton of good reviews, over 1 million users, and is completely free to use. But if you want unlimited access and no ads, Hone Premium is also an option. So if you want to whiff on an optimized computer like me, download Hone using my link in the description. Okay, how are we measuring difficulty? There are a bunch of things that affect how hard it is to rank up in Valorant, but I'm going to narrow it down to just 4 metrics that I think best outline the difficulty of the average player's ranked climb. Skill, coordination, mentality, and circumstance. Yes, I'm generalizing a lot here, but it's necessary. If you think there's something that affects the difficulty that I'm leaving out, please let me know in the comments. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. But no more stalling, let's get into it. Skill is the average player's individual mastery of the game. Things like aim, movement, game sense, agent knowledge. When the average skill of the enemy is higher, the more difficult it is to climb. This is going to vary from region to region because things like size of player pool, FPS history, or regional metas. Logically, because of Europe's larger player pool and past FPS dominance, Europe should be more skillful on average. But let's see if the statistics and testimony support this idea. Beep boop, beep beep boop boop. That was me pulling up the data. In every rank above gold, average headshot percentage is higher in Europe. While headshot percentage could be caused by other things besides the mechanical skill of the player, when it's averaged over the entire player base of each region and comes out higher on all of the ranks above gold, it would be unreasonable to not at least say it somewhat confirms Europe having, on average, better mechanical skill. I talked with a few Radiant coaches and I surveyed my European audience, and generally people agreed that Europe had slightly higher mechanical skill on average. Zammey, why do you keep saying on average like that? Because it's really important you understand those words. These stats are very large averages from numbers that vary huge amounts from player to player. A random European silver may or may not have better aim than a random NA silver, but when you take thousands and thousands of players and average their stats, small differences start to become noticeable. And when looking at the entire ranked population, there's a slight trend in one direction. There's a slight skill gap between EU and NA. This is Charlatan, likely the most experienced Valorant coach of all time, who has worked with plenty of people from both NA and EU and has experience playing in both regions. I had a really helpful conversation with him, and I'm going to be referencing it a lot. And one thing that he said that a lot of people seem to agree with is that the average EU playstyle is way more selfish and individually focused than NA. That would explain the individual skill of each player being better in EU, but why would EU struggle so much with coordination, the ability and propensity the average player has to work with, plan with, and trust their teammates? If you played ranked in EU before, I think you know what's coming next. So instead of me telling you, I'll just read a few responses I got to the question, why do you think EU ranked is more difficult than NA? Every game you get a mix of people from different countries who don't speak English, and when they do, it's just to argue. EU ranked is hard because no one wants to work as a team. Everyone's trying to solo carry. Somehow, you always end up on a team consisting of some combination of nationalities who cannot coexist with each other. Sad face. Between language barriers, cultural differences, and mentality, which I'll touch on later, coordination is much more difficult and much worse when playing in EU. But does that make EU more difficult? If your teammates won't work together, you're gonna struggle. But it's not just your teammates. The enemy is also going to be less coordinated on average. So if your playstyle is able to exploit the lack of teamwork of the enemy without relying on working with your own team, then you would benefit from the general lack of coordination. And that's exactly the playstyle you tend to see in EU. Strong solo playmakers. But even the strongest solo playmaker needs a flash from his breach sometimes, and when he doesn't get it, he might still win the round because the enemy breach didn't flash either, but because he didn't get his flash, he's gonna get frustrated. Mentality. How much the average player's gameplay is affected by their emotions. I'm sure you've played games with teammates that just no longer want to win after one bad round. The consensus is that EU ranked is more toxic than NA. It's hard to get empirical data to support this because how do you measure that? But from all the people I've surveyed, all the stories I've heard, and my own experience, I'm pretty confident this is true. Just listen to what Charlatan had to say about this. In NA, even gold players were willing to follow my lead, while in Europe, even Radiant players won't listen half the time, and God forbid you ever make the wrong call. So the mentality of EU is more negative than NA. This most definitely makes it more difficult to climb. I, as well as many others I spoke to, would consider this the largest and most impactful difference between the regions. When your teammates are excited to play and win, it makes games so much easier and less taxing. Even if you don't notice it, your mental has a lot of effect on your games. But something that might have an even bigger effect on your games that I feel the need to mention is circumstance. This just covers things like internet stability, hardware, amount of free time you have to play Valorant. Most of these things are correlated with the average wealth of the country you live in, and average GDP per capita is lower on average in Europe. But it varies by such a large amount from country to country, city to city even, that it doesn't feel like it's a consistent enough metric to describe the region as a whole. I think it's worth pointing out because of how much of an effect internet issues or poor hardware have, even if it's not super common. To summarize, EU players have better solo skills, worse team skills, the ranked environment is more toxic, and it may be a bit harder to get high quality hardware and internet, but it really depends. So is it harder to climb in EU? Yes, it is. Are EU players better at Valorant than NA? No, it's just harder to climb, so you might have to put in a little bit more time before your rank is accurately represented. So if you're an EU player watching this, good luck in your games, and if you're not, good luck, because you'll need it too. Thanks again to Hone for sponsoring this video, and thank you to my members who are supporting me. Bye bye.